What if the most misleading thing I was ever told about type 2 diabetes wasn't the diagnosis, but the promise that one perfect diet could make it vanish? I am 105 years old now, and people often assume longevity comes with secret formulas. When they hear I once lived with type 2 diabetes, they usually ask the same question: what did you eat? They expect a single answer, a best diet that reverses the disease once and for all. I once believed that promise myself. It felt orderly, it felt hopeful, and it was wrong in important ways. Before anything else, I need to be precise. A dietary approach for type 2 diabetes has clear functional boundaries. It is not a diagnostic tool. It is not a cure. It is not designed to permanently erase disease susceptibility. It does not override genetic risk, pancreatic aging, or progressive beta cell decline, and it does not guarantee lifelong remission once the supporting conditions change. Diet influences glucose regulation by modifying metabolic inputs, not by eliminating the underlying mechanisms that predispose someone to diabetes. When these boundaries are not stated explicitly, diet is often credited with capabilities it does not biologically possess. What diet can do, and what it did for me, is support remission under defined conditions. My blood sugar returned to normal ranges when those conditions were carefully maintained. When they were not, the vulnerability resurfaced. In medical terms, reversal implies eradication of disease mechanism. A standard type 2 diabetes does not meet. There is no single best diet that applies universally. Outcomes depend on genetics, disease duration, remaining beta cell function, medications, age, and metabolic flexibility. Science compares dietary strategies within contexts. It does not crown permanent winners. If you are listening, I am not offering certainty. I am offering accuracy, the kind that holds up when everything else is stripped away. After I let go of the idea that one perfect diet could solve everything, something unexpected happened. My results improved. Not because I had found a better rule book, but because I stopped asking diet to do a job it was never designed to do. When I was first diagnosed, I treated food like medicine. I believed that if I chose correctly and followed strictly, diet itself would fix the disease. That belief is common and understandable, but it rests on a misunderstanding of how type 2 diabetes actually functions. The condition is not caused by eating the wrong foods in isolation, and it is not undone by eating the right ones forever. It is the result of long-term metabolic stress interacting with genetics, aging, and declining beta cell capacity. Once I understood that, I began paying attention to context instead of labels. I tried lower carbohydrate eating during periods when my glucose was volatile. It helped, clearly and measurably, because it reduced the immediate demand for insulin. Later, when my weight stabilized and insulin sensitivity improved, a more moderate approach worked just as well. I saw others experience the opposite. Some struggled on low-carbohydrate plans, but responded well to calorie-controlled, lower-fat diets that promoted gradual weight loss. The lesson was unmistakable. The effect of a diet depends on the biological state it enters. This is why science does not speak in absolutes. A study never proves that one diet is best in all circumstances. It shows that under specific conditions, certain ages, body compositions, disease durations, and medication profiles, one approach may outperform another. Outside those conditions, the advantage often disappears. Another misconception I had to abandon was the idea that remission meant safety. When my blood glucose normalized, I felt relief and then temptation. I assumed the danger had passed. But remission is conditional. It exists only while the factors that created it remain in place. When weight increased, when activity declined, when sleep was disrupted, the numbers responded accordingly. This was not relapse in a moral sense. It was physiology doing exactly what it was built to do. Understanding this removed shame from the process. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening again?" I learned to ask, "Which condition changed?" That question always had an answer. Diet, in this framework, became one input among several. Food choices affected glucose most strongly when they aligned with other factors. Weight loss amplified dietary effects by reducing fat accumulation in insulin-sensitive organs. Physical activity enhanced muscle glucose uptake. Sleep stabilized hormonal regulation. Stress management prevented cortisol from undermining insulin action. When one of these factors weakened, diet alone could not fully compensate. Age introduced another layer of complexity. Metabolic flexibility declines over time. Foods I tolerated well at 50 required more caution at 80. Meal timing mattered more. Large evening meals disrupted glucose control more than they once had. Portion sizes needed adjustment, not because of discipline, but because digestion and insulin signaling slowed. Accepting this prevented me from clinging to habits that no longer served me. I also learned that rigid dietary identities were a liability. People who define themselves by a single approach often resisted change even when their bodies demanded it. The most stable outcomes came from flexibility guided by feedback, not ideology. Blood glucose readings, physical energy, sleep quality, and recovery told me more than any label ever could. Medication, when used, followed the same principle. It did not negate the value of diet, nor did diet eliminate the need for careful medical coordination. Timing mattered. Dosage mattered. Adjustments required supervision and patience. Treating medication as either a failure or a cure distorted its role. It was another tool, effective within defined limits. Over time, I stopped searching for permanence. I stopped expecting stability without maintenance. What replaced those expectations was something quieter but more reliable: responsiveness. I adjusted when conditions changed. I simplified when complexity added no benefit. I avoided promises that sounded complete but ignored biology. The people I watched struggle the most were not those who chose the wrong diet, but those who believed a diet should work regardless of circumstances. That belief creates disappointment, and disappointment leads many to abandon strategies that could have worked if framed honestly. If there is wisdom in my age, it is this: type 2 diabetes does not reward certainty. It rewards attentiveness. Diet matters, but only when it is placed where it belongs, inside a system that is constantly changing. Once I accepted that, remission became something I could sustain, not perfectly, not permanently, but realistically. By the time I reached my later decades, I no longer measured success by how long my blood sugar stayed normal, but by how quickly I noticed when conditions began to shift. That awareness, more than any food rule, was what allowed me to maintain remission over long periods without falling into the illusion of permanence. The first principle I learned was that the body does not store decisions, it stores consequences. I could commit to a dietary approach with perfect sincerity, but my physiology only responded to inputs it could process. When people say a diet stopped working, what they usually mean is that the biological context changed. Aging, stress, illness, inactivity, or medication adjustments quietly alter the terrain. If the strategy does not evolve, the outcome will. Weight management illustrates this better than almost anything else. Early in my journey, modest weight loss produced dramatic improvements in glucose regulation. Fat accumulation in the liver and pancreas interferes with insulin signaling, and reducing it restored function to a degree. But as the years passed, weight loss became a different equation. Excessive restriction threatened muscle mass, bone density, and immune resilience. At that stage of life, preserving strength mattered more than chasing numbers. I learned that the goal of weight management changes with age, and so must the dietary approach supporting it. Physical activity followed a similar arc. In my middle years, I believed exercise needed intensity to matter. Later, I saw that regularity was far more powerful. Gentle movement after meals improved glucose disposal in ways sporadic effort never matched. Resistance training preserved muscle, which acted as a metabolic buffer. When injury or illness limited movement, glucose control deteriorated despite unchanged eating. That was not dietary failure. It was a predictable shift in glucose demand and utilization. Sleep became a central pillar I had underestimated for decades. I observed that even perfect adherence to a dietary plan could not overcome chronic sleep disruption. Poor sleep elevated stress hormones, reduced insulin sensitivity, and increased fasting glucose. Protecting rest stabilized outcomes in a way no macronutrient adjustment ever did. This taught me that diet does not operate in isolation from the nervous system. Stress revealed itself as a silent metabolic driver. Emotional strain raised my glucose even when meals were unchanged. Cortisol and adrenaline interfered with insulin action efficiently and without warning. Managing stress became a physiological necessity rather than a lifestyle preference. Predictable routines, reduced stimulation, and deliberate quiet were not luxuries. They were part of metabolic maintenance. Meal timing gained importance as I aged. Late eating affected my glucose more than it once had. Smaller, earlier meals aligned better with slowing digestion and insulin response. These adjustments were not ideological. They were practical responses to biological change. Ignoring them produced predictable results. Medication, when involved, required coordination rather than opposition. I learned that diet does not replace medical oversight, nor does medication negate the value of dietary structure. Timing, dosage, and gradual adjustment mattered. Abrupt changes created instability. Careful alignment allowed each tool to support the other. Perhaps the most important shift was abandoning the idea that remission should feel secure. It never did and never should have. Remission is conditional by definition. It exists only while the conditions that support it remain in place. Expecting otherwise leads people to misinterpret physiological feedback as failure rather than information. I also learned to distrust narratives that frame diabetes management as a battle to be won. That mindset encourages overconfidence and rigid thinking. What sustained me was not victory, but vigilance. Quiet, consistent, and adaptive. If there is a framework that replaced the search for the best diet, it is this: observe, adjust, repeat. When something stopped working, I did not defend it. I changed it. When conditions stabilized, I simplified. I avoided extremes that promised certainty at the expense of adaptability. Diet remained essential, but it worked because it was placed within a living system. Once I understood that, maintaining remission stopped feeling fragile and started feeling manageable. Not permanent, not guaranteed, but honest, responsive, and aligned with reality. At 105 years old, I no longer believe in perfect solutions. What I believe in is accuracy. Because accuracy is what holds when time strips everything else away. If there is one mistake I see repeated over and over, it is asking diet to promise what biology never can. There is no single best diet for type 2 diabetes. There never was. What works depends on genetics, how long the disease has been present, how much pancreatic function remains, age, medications, and the body's current metabolic flexibility. Science does not crown winners. It evaluates context. The moment a diet is framed as universally superior, it has already drifted beyond evidence. I also no longer use the word reverse without precision. In medical terms, reversal implies eradication of the disease mechanism. A standard type 2 diabetes does not meet. What many of us achieve is remission, normal or near normal blood glucose that persists only while specific conditions are maintained. When those conditions change, the vulnerability remains. This is not failure. It is the expected behavior of a living system. Diet mattered enormously in my life, but only when it stayed within its functional boundaries. It was never a diagnostic tool. It was never a cure. It did not erase genetic risk or halt beta cell decline, and it never guaranteed lifelong remission. What it did was influence glucose regulation by shaping the inputs my metabolism had to process each day. The reason I lived this long was not because I found a secret menu, but because I learned to listen. I paid attention to sleep, movement, stress, timing, and age-related change. I adjusted without defending old habits. I treated food as one lever among many, not the entire machine. If you are searching for certainty, this story may disappoint you. But if you are searching for something more durable, an honest framework that adapts as your body changes, then this is what I offer. Stop asking diet to end the conversation. Start using it to support the conditions that allow remission to exist. Longevity, like remission, is not a promise. It is a practice, and accuracy is the discipline that makes both possible.